didn't intend to do a product review, but when the weather does it for you, you might as well join in. I'm standing here with my Kodiak canvas tent. My family and I have had this for about 3 years, and today we're going to do a product review that I didn't intend on doing. Um, the plan was to do an overview of a property that my wife and I recently acquired, an opportunity to get out to the country. The tent was more or less set up just so we could enjoy the weather and the outdoors. And here's the dog. This is Molly. She'll be with us quite a few times. So it's been about a week or more when we had actual temperature sitting at around 25 degrees below zero. It was really cold. And then not long after that, the temperature jumped up to almost 60. So it was an 80 to 85 degree switch in real temperature. And when you considered wind chill, it was a switch of like 100 degrees. So the chance to get outside was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. My kids and I stayed out here, and we enjoyed that first night. It got down into the 30s. It was a pleasant rest. Molly, come back. Molly, rest. And then I had to go to work. So it was a Sunday into a Monday. I left this up and I went to work. Where I live, the wind can come up with very little notice. I checked the weather the morning before or the night before and the morning of, and it had predicted gusts of maybe 20 miles per hour. By mid-afternoon, my weather app showed that the wind gusts were up to 45 miles per hour, and I also know that those measurements come from specific stations, weather stations, airports, and things like that. And when you get out into the open prairie where we are, the winds can actually be more intense. So my guess is that this tent on a Monday afternoon was hit with winds anywhere from 50 to 55 miles per hour. When I came out here to check on it, I'll show you a few things that happened. Number one, these poles here came loose from the rope, the guy lines, and from the peg at the bottom of the tent. This one, and the two on the other side. Considering, again, winds that I'm estimating could have hit 55 miles per hour, a tent this big staying where it was is pretty good. I have a wood stove in this tent. It makes it essentially a cabin tent, with an emphasis on the word cabin. And as you zip back, as we remove the flap here, I'll just flip it up for you. You'll see this here, this heat-resistant material with rubber flashing. I want to point that out because in 55 mile per hour winds, the smokestack tipped over. It tipped over in a way to. When it tipped over, it lifted the post it lifted the pipe off the wood stove, and it left it hanging from this hole over the edge. This is one of the reasons why I love this tent, because you see a lot of hot tents that will give you either the heat-resistant shield built into the tent like you see here, but you cut the hole, or they give you a flap that you have to install yourself and then again cut the hole. I truly believe that this rubber ring saved the integrity of the tent, and specifically this heat-resistant material, because if you have tears in any kind of fabric and that tear is pulled or has tension applied to it, you're going to see it rip apart. So even though 55 mile an hour winds took a metal stovepipe and flipped it over the side, there is absolutely no damage here, none at all. Now there was damage over by the storm window. And I'll emphasize again, I don't like a tent that's damaged, but this was hit with very high winds. These posts here came off. You could say they failed, but the post itself wasn't damaged. The um, the tent where this part where the rivets are, that wasn't damaged, and even these nylon straps that are sewn into this double seamed hem here, none of that shows any damage at all. So what happened, I'm guessing, but I'm pretty sure, is that once these posts here lifted off their pegs and the tent was flown back, this entire surface, this entire fabric surface, was held against the wind by this storm window cover. And as you can see, the hem down here at the bottom ripped off a bit. Now, I think it's amazing that in 55-mile-per-hour winds it didn't rip off more, but nonetheless it ripped off that far, and so I'm going to have to do a little repair work. It doesn't affect the integrity of the tent itself. Water can't get in, and none of the seams of the tent ripped. It is disappointing, but after 3 years of use outside and strong winds, that's really the only damage I have to report. Now, I was going to at one time, highlight or suggest that this did extremely well in wind, because we have had it out in windstorms before, and there was no damage, no variation to the tent. One of the first weekends we took it out, we went to a campground next to a lake. It was a good test, just personally, because another family had purchased one of those traditional plastic or polyester tents, brand new, right out of the bag, set it up on the other side of this camping space we were at, and that evening winds blew up. Winds came up that night. I didn't really notice it. The tent flapped a bit, but it was all very secure. When we woke up the next morning, the family that was using the brand new plastic tent, brand new nylon tent, the roof had caved in a bit. They ended up tying the tent itself to a picnic table because it was about to blow away. Their only way of preventing it from actually blowing away, though, was they had to open all the windows to let the air go through. So they said it was a horrible night's rest. The tent was destroyed, and I don't know. I think they went camping again, but they didn't use that tent. It was done. This was perfectly fine. My guess is we were looking at winds of 30 to 35 miles per hour, which camping isn't really unheard of. You're going to get winds like that. So I like this tent for that reason. The rest of it, if you go around the front, you're going to see, and I think you've seen other reviews, if you're looking for reviews on this particular tent, the metal poles are hefty. The material is hefty. The corners here, I would note, are particularly strong. They're nylon straps that are themselves probably 2 inches wide and attached up a ways on this little lip here. And I apologize if I don't get the terminology right. In all, this was a very good purchase despite the damage. I've seen product reviews on tents like this before, and usually the review is a review of the first use when you put it up. This isn't the first use. This is going to be, again, 3 years in warm weather and cold. I'm going to zip up this little flap here, and then I want to show you one thing on the inside. But before I do, I've learned, or I guess I wish, there were 3 changes to this tent. 3 changes. Probably not the most important, but they would help. Number 1, the stove that fits this tent. I have a Camp Chef Alpine stove. It's not the same company, but it fits really well with this. There's another company, I believe, Colorado Cylinder Stove, who produces a product very similar. The stovepipe does not come with any attachments to secure it to the tent. So one of my proposals would be that there be a chain of some kind to attach to the top, one side of the ridge and the other, and then another line to come down to the ground, either to attach to the same stake that the tent is attached to or separately. But a three-point harness essentially for the stack could prevent it from toppling over in a windstorm. That would be helpful. The other thing, I guess it's not an addition, but something I've learned, is that you're also going to see this tent comes with an optional awning, an additional awning. I want to emphasize exactly what that does to this tent. Some of the reviews show you the awning and some of them don't, but this tent without the awning is completely different than the tent with the awning. And once you set it up, it's going to be abundantly clear why. The awning is, well, before I do that, let's talk about the tent. This tent body is a single fabric structure. There are no walls to attach using Velcro or zippers. It is sewn together at every corner and every seam. All the openings from the windows to the doors are those famous YKK zippers. You don't have to adjust all of it. So once you pull this out of the bag, you throw it on the ground and stake it in place. Yes, there are a number of stakes. Yes, it's a big tent, but it's entirely one piece. Even the new plastic nylon tents have rain flies, so you have to set up the body of the tent with the mesh top and then throw the rain fly over it. Not with this. This is a single piece, and overall, it's not the worst thing to set up. Once you add the awning, however, it becomes an entirely different tent. You get more room, you get a great benefit out of it, but it is a different tent because the awning is multiple pieces. The roof on the awning is one piece. The sidewalls are their own piece. It's one massive length of fabric, uninterrupted, that goes all the way around one side, over the front and back on the other side. The poles that you see, unlike these poles which stand alone through and connect through grommets, the poles that you're going to see in the awning are interconnected through their own pegs and holes, and it's very unlikely that you're going to set it up successfully by yourself the first time, and it's frankly, it's difficult even if you're experienced. The awning takes just as long, if not longer, to set up than this entire tent because it's a whole bunch of pieces. It's a complicated Lego project, for lack of a better description. It's a whole different tent. Now, I still use the awning, and I like the awning, especially on longer trips, and here's why. This is a cabin tent, and I think I alluded to this before. It's a cabin tent with an emphasis on the word cabin. If you see cabin tent, I don't really know the technical term or the definition in the camping world. I assume cabin tent means that at some point in some limited space inside the tent, a grown man of about 6 feet could stand up. If you can't tell, I'm a bigger individual, bigger person. I'm about 6'5", almost 300 pounds. So a cabin tent for me really doesn't do very much. This is a cabin tent, but it's not like any other cabin tent you're going to find on the market outside of a traditional wall tent. I can walk from the front to the back and stand up the entire way. I can go side to side a good distance and stand up the entire time. This, even though it's a little more work to set up, essentially when you're done, you have a cabin. So at this point, I think we are going to move inside the tent for one quick review. Okay, standing in the tent, I have this focused here on the stovepipe. I'm going to move it out and show you one of the things that I encountered the hard way, but thankfully for me, it wasn't really a hard lesson. So let's get moving on that. Right now, I'm just moving all of the stovepipe from inside the tent outside because I'm hoping to show you the mat that you need below it. go. All right. I have two different mats here. One of them works well in a tent. The other one, not so much. This is a heat map. It has certain properties and aluminum materials that prevent, or at least do a better job, deflecting heat away from the ground. I got this because really I hadn't thought much about it when I first bought the tent. This one here I purchased directly from the Kodiak canvas website. Just shy of $50. I think it's worth it, but you're going to have an opportunity to test its performance right now. And I say that because as I move to this, before I do, when I first started camping this last weekend, it was cool enough that we decided to light a fire. It was cool enough. I decided to light a fire, and I used paper and sticks, small sticks, to do it. The flue was open all the way, which is typical when you first start a fire in a stove. However, I wasn't paying attention to it until the stovepipe itself turned red hot, and at that point I knew I had to calm it down. I was able to close the flue and the draft holes in the front of the stove tent, and the color went away quickly. However, the aluminum mat was hot after that. It got hot quickly. So my hope is that the temperature did not penetrate that heat map and damage the floor. And so, which brings me to the next point. When I first purchased this tent and was looking for a piece of fabric of some sort to put under the stove tent, I went with a welder's blanket because, well, obviously they work with fire and heat, and it should be just fine. I'm going to tell you, as I'll show you in a minute, a welder's blanket does not deflect heat. It is flame retardant. You can put a torch to it, and it's not going to start on fire. However, it is not designed to deflect heat, at least not from my experience. So if you put something warm, like a stove, on top of it, it'll certainly prevent the floor from bursting into flames because an ember landed on it, but it will not prevent that deep heat from a wood stove from penetrating through the fabric, the fiberglass material, and hitting the floor. So let's see what happened, because I want to make sure that the aluminum heat shield actually did its job. So let's remove this. I'm going to tell you right now, I feel pretty good about this. The holes that you see on the floor through this vinyl tarp, and what you're looking at here is just a traditional tarp, vinyl tarp that I purchased over the computer. So it's plastic. This was the damage from the last time when I didn't have a heat map and I was only using the welder's blanket. So this hasn't changed at all. What happened to the floor was that it deformed it a little bit. It's hard to see, but the crinkles, the wrinkles are a little bit smaller, a little bit tighter here than they are in other parts of the tent. So when it got really, really hot, the floor was deformed a little bit. But there was no, I would say, no breaks, no holes, and frankly, it really doesn't even look like it was shrunk too much. You can see this plastic was deformed significantly in addition to the holes. This was not. There are a few crinkles, but that was not affected, and I can tell at least from the heat blanket, that there has been no change at all to this floor from what it was before. So now we go back to the first thing I said, which is my family and I have had this tent for about 3 years, and but for this last windstorm of potentially 55 miles an hour and the rips on the storm window overhang, there is no damage. The only other wear and tear would be on the front. There are a few lines that look like maybe the color was bleached by some uh, rain or sun, but those markings are very limited. Overall, I'm very pleased with this tent. It's disappointing that there was that wind damage, but there is no other tent that I've seen that could put up with that kind of wind while at the same time giving you this much space. If you look at it, it's a lot of canvas, a lot of material. Wind could whip it up very easily, but inside it is spacious, it is comfortable, and I've enjoyed it. I didn't intend to do a product review, but when the weather does it for you, you might as well join in. Thanks for watching, and happy camping. Yeah, Molly. Ah, that's a good pooch. Want to say goodbye? Let's go put away the tent, huh? Let's go put away the tent.